Good morning, Costas. How are you doing?
Good morning, Matteo. I'm doing very well. It's finally sunny in London after rain every day this year, I was told yesterday. Today is sunny.
Very
So
good,
I'm
which
well.
doesn't happen too often, I believe.
Not this year. Not this year.
New week, new episode. And this time we're not referencing an article, we're referencing one of many, to be frank, social media posts that I came across a couple of days ago. And this post is claiming that as a society, I guess as people, we do not talk enough about the feeling of heaviness, anxiety, dread that catches you days before, hours or days before a stressful, challenging meeting. And I thought, I know someone who might have some good perspective about this. So let me text Costas. Here we are. We also spoke about kindness. We spoke about having tough conversations. So I guess it all ties quite well together. How do you frame a topic like this? What comes to your mind when thinking about stressful, challenging meetings?
Yeah, no, as I hear you, Matteo, I have to share with you and your listeners that last week I had a stressful meeting
Mhm.
and I didn't sleep for 5 days leading up to it. Not really well. So the first kind of response, right, is that it's very, very difficult, however prepared you are, uh, to manage your nerves and your well-being in advance of having that's something that's going to be a difficult conversation or a tough decision, which creates stress and anxiety. And it's the natural sort of response mechanism of the neuroscientific brain, right? The amygdala, this fear that things will be made worse by you raising a topic. So I'd like to think I help some of my clients deal with those things and we can talk about that. But I certainly felt it myself. Not easy. I've slept better in the last few days, but I didn't sleep for 5 days leading up to a stressful meeting I had.
Is it too personal if I ask you what was going on in your head? Like, what were you stressed about? And I don't need to obviously know the content of the meeting itself or specific details about it, but what was the lead up to the meeting like for you? What was going on in your head? What were you, in a way, anxious about?
Yeah, I think it was this concept that a difficult decision had to be made
Mm.
in a group of people. Um, and how could I help create an environment where we made the decision in a way that didn't make it personal against the minority view? So it was clear to me going into this meeting that there were a couple of minority people in the room. I don't mean minorities. I mean with views that the majority did not agree with.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, how can we discuss this topic in a way that doesn't label the people who think differently and focus on the desired outcome and be as rational and objective and as unemotional as possible in delivering that message. And that in itself is stressful.
Hmm. Is it fair to say, let me phrase it this way, and maybe that's not the exact phrasing I want to go for, but were you more concerned about the outcome of the meeting, or were you more concerned about your preparation for the meeting, the way you showed up yourself?
Yeah, no, that's a really insightful observation, Matteo. I was definitely concerned about how I showed up because
Mm.
again, I'm a leadership coach. I coach people to focus, to manage their ego. We talked about it briefly last time.
Yeah.
To not take things personally, not to label other people's behavior, not to ascribe motive to why they view things differently than you. So just the effort to be as objective, as rational, as calm, and as non-personal as is possible to have a more effective outcome was the primary concern I had. I'm supposed to be the guy who coaches other people to do this. What if I don't show up well? So you're right. The primary concern was whether I could manage my own ego and make sure I didn't make things personal. The second concern, you're absolutely right, was about whether or not the outcome would be the right outcome for the organization. And we could talk about that in a moment, but I certainly use some of the techniques that some of my clients have found useful in preparing to make sure that the outcome, hopefully, was the right outcome.
So I definitely want to touch on the techniques, but before we get there, can you in any way walk me through the preparation that you put into the meeting? What does it look like? I see you as a coach of a certain caliber, and I think people will be curious to hear, how does Costas prepare for a difficult meeting? How does Costas manage his nerves? How does he make sure that he puts his ego aside? And I know it's a loaded question, but how do you prepare for a meeting like that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, and we talked about it, I think, a couple of years ago, is the whole framework that Sally Helgeson came up with. So the first piece, anyway, before Sally, is accept that you have an ego, that if you believe somebody else's point of view is invalid, right, or less appropriate than your own, don't ascribe a value judgment to their view. Yeah. Don't say to yourself, oh, that's born of bias. That's born of a bad motive. That's born, it may be, by the way, but you cannot betray that in a stressful situation. It helps nobody, right? To label somebody as biased in some way or to suggest that this is personal. So the first sort of preparation is, as we've said before, think of what the desired outcome is. The desired outcome in this case was we want to achieve X for the organization. And therefore, in the preparation, what arguments are there that have nothing to do with the personalities or the styles or the approaches or the potential motives, of the people who disagree with you? And what rational arguments are there that I can prepare and list calmly that I will suggest are the foundation of the decision that needs to be made?
Mm-hmm.
But Sally Helker, so that's the first thing, right? Just think about not being personal, uh, being rational, and thinking about the desired outcome based on what's in the best interests of the organization. But more importantly, man, and this has really hit me quite hard recently, is what Sally Helgeson said. I actually did exactly what Sally Helgeson suggests you do in preparing for a difficult conversation. The first thing you have to do is enlist. What does that mean? I realized 6 months ago that we were going to a difficult place in this organization. And I started proactively reaching out to the people I trusted to make sure my point of view was valid, or to stress test it, to get their input, to make sure I understood how they all felt about it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. But in the journey of several months of having conversations with those I trusted, I felt comfortable that the right decision had to be made and that I had allies ready in the room to agree with me if they agreed with me, not because I asked them to, but if they agree with me, to actually make sure they said so in the meeting. And that's what Sally Helgeson says, not simply asking for input before you make your point, but asking people directly. And by the way, Matteo, when I make my point in this meeting, do you mind if you agree with me in the meeting? It would be really helpful if you agree with me. So I did step one of Sally quite thoughtfully, quite intentionally, with several other members of this organization.
You know why I think that's refreshing? I mean, first of all, it is refreshing to hear that someone like yourself is also stressed before a meeting. That's something I asked you, I believe, a few days.
We're all human, Matteo. We're all human.
We're all human indeed. But it's also refreshing because I think lots of people looking at you would think, well, if I were Costas, I would probably wake up in the morning, just walk into a meeting and own the room. Everyone would listen to me, and that's it. No preparation needed. But you just mentioned that you were reaching out to people months in advance, and you were very intentional about what you wanted to achieve. And yes, that's a lot of work, but it's also really refreshing to hear that someone of your caliber, someone who has lots of experience, also goes through that process. And I doubt that lots of people that are a lot more junior actually do that.
I think they may. I mean, I think I'm not, again, you know me, I'm not an ageist. I think young people are even more capable than old people like me. So I think they probably do, man. They probably do it by talking to their friends and saying, I have a difficult conversation with my boss, or I'm getting, undermined by a colleague. So they sort of do, but they may not do it internally. You're right. They may do it externally to stay calm and to make sure they manage themselves well, but they may not specifically do it with intention internally. That takes a bit more confidence or a bit more risk, because you can only do it with people you've grown to trust, right? You can only reach out to somebody and say, by the way, I'm going to say something that may be confrontational or difficult. Do you think I'm crazy, or do you think I'm right? Oh, no, Costas, we agree with you. Oh, well, do you mind then agreeing with me? Is a very risky proposition if you do it with people that ultimately betray your trust, right? So I think it's harder when you're junior. Don't get me wrong. I simply think it's a function of role, right, and exposure to enough people. But you're absolutely right, man. Everybody needs to enlist. And the second piece of enlisting is preparation. That's what Sally says, which we've already really talked about. So the preparation, as I said, in this case, was not only managing myself, but thinking about, and Sally says, the specific words you're going to use, the specific words you're going to use, rather than the theme. So I was not only thinking about, I need to raise this topic because it's the right decision for the organization, but how am I going to raise it? Am I going to say, well, if we make this decision, it undermines the organization? Am I going to say that it's only appropriate for future board members to make this decision? How am I going to phrase it in a way that is likely, right, to land more effectively and be received less personally? So that's the element of preparation I also took on board. Not just the topic, but the words I would use to display the topic.
It's also really difficult to find the right words. I understand the preparation, and I also imagine, and this happens more often than not. Like I come from the tech industry. For lots of people, English is not their first language, although they might speak English very, very well.
Yeah. Yep.
And finding the right words is not nothing. Now these days and age, we have AI, ChatGPT, and whatnot, and maybe that can help in our preparation. But finding the right words is certainly a hard task. Do you think that it can be somehow compensated with bringing the right energy to the meeting? So words, you can prepare for them. Sure, you can have, I'm not saying a script, but you can have a solid idea of the framework you want to use. It will never be perfect. Maybe not, it doesn't land as well as you think it might be. Is energy somehow supplementing that?
Wow. Did not expect that energy. What a great question. Absolutely. But I think what energy means is heart and soul, not just logic. I'm coaching this brilliant senior person at the moment, and it's the first time he hasn't achieved an objective in his career. And he's, a very well-established senior figure. And some of the feedback I gave him a few years ago, and he has since received, is that he tries to win arguments based on logic rather than empathy. Isn't that an interesting piece of feedback? So in some ways, the energy, right, is building trust with people, not simply on, guys, do you agree with my logic that the right decision is this? Or do you feel that in order to treat people fairly internally, yeah, we should make the decision not just for the organization, but for the people who run it? So I think if you focus on the emotional or the heart and soul, as I called it, yeah, the human element of the decision, just as much as the rational one, I agree with you. I think your words matter less, because people then see that your concern is not because A and B equals C, right? But because if we don't do A and B, do you know what will happen? People will be demotivated. People won't aspire to join this organization or may choose to leave it. There are bigger issues about outcomes than just the results. Yeah. So I think what you've said, for me, really resonates in that way. Yeah. It's not just about, guys, is this right rationally, but is it right emotionally? I don't want to say morally, but maybe ethically, maybe humanly. Yeah. What message does this decision send? Not only to the people who work for the organization, but for those who work with the organization. So I think you're right. I think that's what energy is to me. How do you approach, right, a difficult topic in a way that's not only calm and rational, which is where I started, but also displays an element of humanity? And I do think, now that you've challenged me really fairly, that the preparation and the enlisting with my other colleagues that I felt would agree if I explained it right was not just rational. Was not just rational. It was, what do we think the right answer is for everyone concerned here?
I'm happy it resonated. There is one more point I want to touch. We're heading towards the closure of the conversation. Before I do that, and before I hit you with the final question, is there anything that you think we should cover but we haven't so far?
Just briefly, what we're really talking about is a phrase that was coined, sorry to mention another article, but in an article again in Harvard Business Review, but several months ago, a phrase that was coined that really landed well with me. And it's called conflict intelligence.
Hmm.
And the older I grow and the more people I coach, I realize that actually it's conflict intelligence that makes leaders the most effective. So, how to deal with effectively stressful, difficult situations. And the good news is that um, by practicing it, you can get better at it. Remember, Carol Dweck has written a lot about the growth mindset. We all want to grow. So one of the elements of preparation, right, is to think about Galway. We talked about Galway, the inner game of tennis. Anything that's challenging, don't think of it as something that's going to obstruct your progress. Think of it as something that will help you grow as a leader. My goodness, if I can deal with this difficult thing today, I may be better at doing it next time. I mean, I'm coaching a brilliant senior person. And for the first time in this past year, he has let people go in a way that was constructive rather than destructive. And in the past, he would simply fire them on the spot and not explain it, right? And he told me, it's the first time in my career I've been able to let people go by explaining rationally the facts. Well, the position, the needs of the organization have changed. Yeah. So we no longer need your skill set. Or, I don't think this is working, but let's find a timeline, yeah, for you to exit that works for you and for us. Yeah. Thinking beyond the immediate reaction and finding a way that lands well and teaches you how to do this thing better in the future. And I was amazed. He said, first time in my career, I've actually explained my decisions rather than simply make them. So the good news is, the last point I want to make, is that these things can be learned, right? The more you practice, the more neurologically you can build new connections that help you prepare for these difficult, stressful situations more effectively.
Very clear. Our last 30 seconds to 1 minute. There's something that I really, really want to touch with you, and I think it's not really spoken about enough.
Mm.
It's the post meeting. We talk about preparing and we talk about the stress that leads up to the meeting, your stomach turns upside down and all of that. Um, what happens after the hard meeting when you have that, let's call it the emotional hangover, so to speak? How do you stop replaying the meeting in your head? How do you vent down? Um, do you have any preferred approach to do so?
Yes, I think nothing beats communication, Matteo, and nothing beats a debrief. In investment banking, often we talked about having post-meeting debriefs, and they rarely happened. They rarely happened because sometimes people were uncomfortable getting feedback on their own performance in a difficult meeting, right? So to give you an example, I immediately asked, after this meeting ended and the outcome was the right outcome, and it was a very difficult meeting, and certain decisions were made that people didn't like who then left the organization. I asked, how did I do, guys? I've been telling you for 6 months I was not going to be personal. Was I able to not be personal? So I asked for feedback. And more than one of them said, Costas, no, you did really well. It wasn't personal, but we've never seen your serious face for that long. For that long, right? Tells you that I was really in the moment having to be careful. Now, feedback. So post-event feedback from the people you trust, if they were in the room.
Mhm.
But more importantly, this is the point. I always talk about things you can control rather than things that concern you. If
Mhm.
we spend energy on, oh my goodness, I could have done that differently. Oh, the person now thinks I'm an asshole, or people are really nervous now because there's a lot of tension in the air. We've had a stressful this situation or conversation. Yeah, don't focus on that. I mean, it's easier said than done. Focus on what are the next steps we need to make to regain ownership of the narrative of the next steps of this. So we're having a in-person meeting, right, with the remaining sort of participants in this organization, and we're going to go through, risk mitigation. What risks are there in the system from both a people perspective and an organization perspective that we need to be mindful of? What can we do about them? Who's going to do what? Yeah. How are we going to think about how we present ourselves next time? So nothing beats, rather than reflecting and worrying and concerning about what you may or may not have said or could have done differently, right? It's not over. Yeah. Life is not a one-shot deal, right? What are we going to do, guys? What do we think the lessons learned are? And what are we actually going to do to think ahead and think forward rather than think back?
I very much look forward to our next conversation, Costas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matteo. I will be fully prepared for that one.